in many places, the Iraqi army just fled in the face of this offensive. There's been billions of dollars of US taxpayer money poured into training and equipping the Iraqi government. Has this been squandered? Is it a failure?
Well, Joe, obviously the last events of
Yes.
the events of the last several days are clearly they're alarming, and I think there's no question about that. There was a clear structural breakdown. We were disappointed by the reaction or the steps that were taken by a range of security forces, but our commitment to Iraq is long-term. We share a commitment to addressing the threats from groups like ISIL, and that's why we are continuing to take steps and consider steps to increase their capacity.
And do you have an analysis of what the cause of the structural breakdown was? Why did this happen?
That is something the Iraqi central government is looking into, and I don't have any updates at this point on what their findings are.
Do you believe the Iraqi army is actually in a position to be able to counter this threat that's coming from the ISIL?
Well, I think clearly the events of the last few days tell us that we need to do more, and that's what we're considering here. And we're in touch with a range of partners around the world, and we'll see what is determined out of those conversations.
And just go back to what we were talking about before about Iran. I mean, given the fact that the United States is obviously equipping and training the Iraqi army, do you believe that Iran has a role to do similar things for its part?
It's these statements that they've made are just out in the last sort of 12 hours, and I just don't want to get ahead of where we are in our analysis or consideration of what we think would be appropriate.
Irrespective of the statements they've made, in this situation, in the fact that we have this crisis in Iraq, do you believe that there is a military role for Iran?
Again, our focus is on increasing the capacity and doing what we can do as the United States. As I mentioned, this wasn't an issue that was discussed during the talks in Vienna. I will see if there's more that our team would like to add about our
Turn that around. Can you say that the administration would oppose the deployment of Iranian troops inside of Iraq to defend?
I just don't have anything more to add on this front. Obviously, the entire situation is very fluid. I'm happy to talk to our team and see if there's more we'd like to say from here on this issue.
Recognizing that if a question is posed to you in terms of why, in terms of isn't this a failure, you're never going to say, yes, it was a failure. Can I just ask you, why isn't it? Why should it not be seen as a failure, the fact that not only of the administration's strategy in Iraq, but also in Syria, which you have said played a major role in the bolstering of ISIL and their advance? Why is it wrong to look at this as a failure?
Well, Matt, because I'm not, I think the context of what we're looking at here is important. Obviously, the withdrawal from Iraq in 2011 was not a mistake. That was a decision made with the Iraqi government, consistent with the U.S.-Iraq security agreement, a decision and a timeline that was set out 2011, longer than that. 4 years. What year are we? We're in 2014. Sorry.
Sometimes it feels like 1936.
A decision and a timeline that was set out long before 2011 is, I guess, what I should say, back in 2008, if I remember correctly. And we stand by that decision that was made. Now, obviously, in circumstances like this, there are steps that we've taken, given the increasing threat, whether that's the counterterrorism fund that this president announced just 2 weeks ago, or the increase in assistance we've given. We're not going to make an evaluation that something is a success or a failure because we're continuing to work on it. It is in the interest of the United States and the interest of a range of countries around the world to continue to boost the capacity and take on this threat.
Okay, if you can say that the withdrawal, such as it was in 2011, was not a mistake, which is what you just said, I presume that means that you think it was not a mistake to withdraw because you couldn't get a sofa.
Not just that, but I think the other contextual point here is it would be inaccurate to assume that the small contingent of military that was being discussed at the time would have helped stem or prevent what we're seeing and what we've seen over the last several days and even months. So there were factors that we could not have predicted 5 years ago, 6 years ago, including Obviously, the situation on the ground in Syria, the impact of that, and we've made decisions over the last several months to increase capacity in both cases.
Right, but, I mean, some people did predict this, that complete withdrawal, the withdrawal that happened in 2011 would lead to something like this. Maybe not, in this time frame, but that was predicted, so by
I would
a
pose
range
to
of
these
people.
same individuals whether they would think that the small contingent of military that was being discussed to leave on the ground would have prevented this, and I think the answer would be no.
Okay, there's some criticism, or maybe I should say suspicion, that the president, because he campaigned on ending the Iraq war, which he thought was a mistake to begin with, really didn't try hard enough to negotiate a SOFA with the Iraqis. Can you say that that's false?
I would say that's absolutely false. I would remind you that the timeline was laid out by the prior administration. It wasn't a political decision.
So it was. So that you're saying that you can rule out that it was that it wasn't. See, I don't want to do a double negative, and I'm not trying to trick you. I just it was. You can say for sure that the president tried as hard as he could and directed his administration to try as hard as it could to conclude a SOFA with the Iraqi government.
I can say that there was no politics involved in the decision-making and that there are a range of factors that were considered at the time, now 3 years ago. I'm obviously not going to dial back or go back in history to what was occurring at the time.
Well, okay, but when you say not politics, you mean that it wasn't simply to fulfill a campaign promise? That's what you mean by that?
Yes.
Reports that the Iraqis have actually asked you for drone help.
I'm not going to confirm requests on their behalf. I'm sure if they'd like to speak to it, they will speak to it when you reach out to them.
So when the president says all options remain on the table, does he also mean that the option of possible drone strikes is on the table?
All options aside from boots on the ground.
So including drone strikes?
All options aside from boots on the ground.
Really?
That's,
All options?
I'm not sure
I
where you're
mean,
going.
we have a
at here.
nuclear arsenal that's rather large. I'm assuming that
Well,
option is not
Matt's
on the
playing
table.
his fantasy war
Well,
games
no,
over here.
No, but I mean, come on, it's not, there are several options that are off the table, not just boots on the ground, right?
There are a range of options that remain on the table. I'm not going to do a yes or no for every option that's being discussed.
On Ukraine, there's been reports recently that 3 tanks have crossed the Russian border into Ukraine. I was wondering if you had any confirmation. And if proven true, would this be a step that warrants further sanctions?
I think I do have something on this. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I have it with me. So why don't we get that to you and anyone else who's interested after the briefing. Go ahead.
Well, can we stay in Ukraine for a second? And just, do you remember at all what it was? Is it a confirmation?
Again, I think it's probably sitting on my desk right now, and it came out right before the briefing.
right,
So we'll venture to get that out to all of you shortly after.
There
the
were
briefing.
reports yesterday that the Ukrainian military is using white phosphorus bombs and attacking Slavyansk. Do you know anything about that? Did that come up in the conversation between Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov, if there was one last night?
There was one yesterday, and actually I did find what I wanted to say on the vehicle, so let me get to that after I get to Matt's question. So thank you for your patience.
Thanks.
Okay, we've seen the media reports that 3 Russian tanks and other military vehicles may have crossed the border into eastern Ukraine in the border town of Snizhnia. We have long condemned the flow of Russian fighters and arms into Ukraine as destabilizing and a violation of Russia's Geneva commitments. If these latest reports are true, which I don't have confirmation of, this incursion marks a serious and disturbing escalation of the crisis in eastern Ukraine. As you know, there are a range of factors we look at as it relates to consequences. I don't have anything to outline on that front at this point in time. Your question, I'm sorry, was about
About the phone
use of
call
phosphorus?
and about phosphorus.
The Secretary did speak with Foreign Minister Lavrov just yesterday afternoon. They discussed 2 issues, the ongoing situation on the ground in Ukraine. They did not talk about that specific issue. The Secretary encouraged Foreign Minister Lavrov to encourage President Putin to directly engage with President Poroshenko. We've seen reports that they had a phone call today. He also encouraged that conversation or engagement to focus on de-escalating the situation on the ground, and he called on Russia to halt the flow of militants and arms from Russia into eastern Ukraine, which is clearly relevant in this case. They also discussed Syria's chemical weapons program, The secretary made clear that there's no excuse for failing to turn over the remaining 8% and asked for Foreign Minister Lavrov's assistance in putting additional pressure on the Syrian regime.
Even though it didn't come up in their conversation, do you have anything to say about the reports of the use of phosphorus? And there's some, you know, what appears to be video and photographic evidence of this, the use of this.
By the Russian.
No, by the Ukrainians.
I have not seen those reports. I'm happy to check with our team and see if we have any confirmation of that or more to say
Right.
on that front.